We weren't even supposed to be here. Just another curve in the road toward Tannehill when a weathered wooden sign caught my eye. Sadler Plantation Home, circa 1838. Murph cackled when I whipped the truck into an illegal U-turn, but I couldn't just drive past the house like this. The steps were cool under Dusty's shoes, and breeze carried her through the dog trot hallway. And if you pressed your ear to those old pine boards, you could almost hear the lives that once moved through this place. Lives that remind us the history of the South isn't just about grand porches and cotton wealth, but about dozens of men, women, and children whose names were penciled into ledgers instead of carved into stone. The Sadler home began as a simple log pen in 1817, built by John Loveless on land already marked as an Indian field. By the 1830s, Isaac Wellington Sadler and his wife, Martha Prude, expanded it into the plantation house that still stands today. Isaac was the son of William Rose Sadler, a planter, educator, and founder of Pleasant Hill Methodist Church. He even added what was called a prophet's chamber, a small room set aside for traveling preachers. But behind every polished addition were enslaved hands that made the boards square and the fields yield. Records suggest that dozens of enslaved people lived and labored here, men and women whose stories rarely survive beyond a line in a census book or the silent weight of a ledger. Imagine Rhodey, a midwife who might have delivered both black and white children in the night. Imagine Sam, a blacksmith whose hammer beat out both shackles and secret keepsakes. Imagine Lucy, a girl of 9, already quick at the spindle, or Moses, a carpenter who could measure a board by sight. We don't know their true names, but we know lives like theirs filled the margins of this place. 4 a.m., a cow horse splits the dark. By sunrise, tires are glowing, mush is ladled into wooden bowls, and the smallest children are dragged into half tasks that still demanded 50 pounds of cotton a day. At noon, a brief pause. Cornbread and maybe a swipe of bacon grease, eaten where you stood in the rows. Miss the tally and the whip sang. Make the tally and maybe you earned a scoop more at supper. But even in the hardest days, even when the body was bent double in the fields, Isaac Sadler wasn't a villain in a dime novel. He scribbled poetry in his account books and gave land to the church. He also believed, deeply, that enslaving people was part of God's order for taming the frontier. Cotton was 12 cents a pound in 1859, and when the price spiked, Isaac bought more acres and forced more hands into his ledgers. When the market dipped, he mortgaged next year's crop, gambling with human lives as collateral. When Fort Sumter fell in 1861, the Sadlers' world shifted. Isaac and Martha's son David joined the 28th Alabama Infantry at 17. Letters made it home for a while, but by 1863 he was gone. Another name bled into the red clay of Georgia. Martha's grief wasn't so different from the mourning out in the quarters. Grief didn't care which side of the porch you slept on. Only power did. By May of 1865, Union General James H. Wilson's 13,000 cavalrymen swept through Alabama. 10 miles north, they torched the Tannehill Ironworks. When they passed near Sadler's Plantation, the air was still thick with smoke. Isaac stood on the porch as blue uniforms dusted the road. a Union captain asked for water and fresh mounts. Maybe he glanced toward the cabins and saw dozens of eyes measuring freedom by the length of a rifle barrel. Wilson's men didn't grant 40 acres and a mule here. That was Sherman's order along the coast. But their presence meant emancipation and practice. Some of the people enslaved here likely stayed on as sharecroppers. Others walked away behind the Union columns, tasting freedom one dusty step at a time. After the war, plantations across Alabama buckled under taxes, debts, and lawsuits. The Sadler lands were no exception. By the 1870s, much of the acreage was sold off. The old house lived on as a family home, later a barn, and eventually stood as little more than a weathered relic under the Alabama sun. What became of the people who once worked this soil? Some names may still be tucked into local archives, but most stories live only in imagination and in the bloodlines scattered across the state. It's likely some descendants stayed near Pleasant Hill. Others may have walked until they saw water that wasn't red clay. Today, the Sadler Plantation is quiet, its breezeways still catching the wind. Dusty and I stood on the steps, peered through the old windows, and wondered whose hands planed those beams, whose songs drifted through those cabins, whose grief hung heavy in the air when the soldiers marched by. When you drive by a house like this, it's easy to see only the bricks and timbers. But stop, step closer, and you might hear more. The clang of a hammer, the hum of a lullaby, the shuffle of 43 footsteps heading north. Their war began the first time a child was sold from her mother, and it will never be finished until we choose to remember. So next time the road tempts you into an unplanned stop, listen closely. The past is still here, etched into the dirt under your shoes, waiting for someone to lean down and listen.